Hey guys, I've been a challenger player for the last 4 sets, and I made a quick guide after playing PvE on the strongest early and mid game boards you could play in set 8. So I separated the powerful units into 2 sections. These are going to be the units that you could generally splash into any early game board, and these are going to be the units that help you hit valuable trait breakpoints early game. For example, Vi, EZREAL, and SONA are all underground units. They're the econ trait of set 8, so they will always be valuable early game. Star Guardian's weakness is their frontline, so you basically need RELL to play Star Guardian. Same for Annie, except it's for SPELLSLINGER. Zoe is a very integral part of playing 3 GADGETEEN. And Jax, you basically need Jax to hit 3 mech. I also separated all the early game boards you could play into both AD and AP. Without further ado, let's jump right into the board. So I'm going to talk about the LASERCORPS opener first. The LASERCORPS opener is probably one of the strongest AD openers you could have in set 8. Not only because ASHE and RENEKTON are both really strong, they're also very cheap and consistent to hit because they're both 1-cost units. Honestly, you don't even need the third LASERCORPS because these 2 units are just that good. But generally, your LASERCORPS opener is just going to revolve around these 3 units, and you just splash in a tank trait like Brawler, and you can just play another recon unit for ASHE. The best 5th unit is just going to be VAYNE. But if you don't hit this VAYNE, you just play a second recon unit. Honestly, you don't even need a recon unit because recon's kind of fake. You could just splash in any 2-star unit you hit and you'll be fine. Another variation to LASERCORPS is something like this. Here you're just going to be playing 4 Brawler and 3 LASERCORPS instead. And at level 6, you also have the option of playing 3 Underground. In this case, it's just going to be 3 LASERCORPS plus Vi, EZREAL, and SONA. ASHE typically just likes the standard attack speed and AD items, and then later on you could pivot into a standard AD board. So Anima Squad is a trait that scales from killing units, but the problem with Anima Squad is the 3 core early game units are not that good early game. If you just look at this board, it doesn't look that strong at all. Your only source of damage is Jinx, so you're not going to be killing shit. That's why you should only commit to an Anima Squad opener if you get a Riven or a VAYNE drop. So for example, if you get a VAYNE drop instead, your board just gets so much stronger. Your core 3 Anima Squad units are going to be VAYNE, Nasus, and Sylas. And if you're playing Nasus, you always want to play Galio for the second mascot because Galio's tags are broken. Not only is he a second mascot, but he's also civilian, which continuously grants mana to your entire team. Again, to round out your synergies, you want to play a second duelist for VAYNE, and you just want to play EZREAL for recon as well. Another variation to this, if you hit the VAYNE, is you could play into 4 duelists instead. Here at level 6, your board might look something like this. You just have 3 Anima Squad, and you're playing vertical duelists. Now, if you get a Riven drop, you don't need the VAYNE, but you could play around Riven's tags instead. So Riven is a defender and a brawler. So here Vi could be your second brawler and Wukong could be your second defender. But these 2 units could be anything as long as you have a solid front line. Because you're playing Nasus, you always want the Galio, and your damage is going to be Jinx. If you're playing Jinx, Jinx is a pretty good holder for AP items. If you like Shojin, Archangels, and Morello, any AP item is pretty good. And at level 6, you always have the option to play into 5 Anima Squad because all 5 Anima Squad units early are 3 costs or lower. And if you luckily hit the Misfortune, you can just take out the Jinx or Misfortune and then she could hold all your AP items instead of Jinx. So there are 3 core units to playing SURESHOT. It's just going to be SIVIR. And because you're playing SIVIR and she's a civilian, you can play into the Galio. This opens you up to the mascot frontline. And the only second SURESHOT you can play early game is just going to be SENNA. And you have the option of playing around either the SIVIR or the SENNA. So if you play around the SIVIR, again, you always play around the Galio, and because you're playing Galio, you want a second mascot. And if you're playing a second mascot, then you just want to round out your synergies with 3 Anima Squad. Here, you're just going to play a Sylas and a Jinx. If you want to play around the SENNA instead, then you want to play around LASERCORPS. The 2 other LASERCORPS units you could play are going to be RENEKTON and YASUO. And because you're playing RENEKTON, you can play a second brawler like Bullets to round out your front line. And like I said before, you just want the second SURESHOT in. And because you have the second SURESHOT in, later on at level 6, you can play Galio for 2 civilian. So like I said before, Underground is going to be the econ/mercenary trait of set 8. If you want to play it like an econ trait, you could just cut and run after you break 2 or 3 vaults. If you want to play it like mercenaries, you could cut and run only after your 1 or 2 lives, and then you could spike to win out. So how do you know when to commit to Underground early game? So you generally only want to try and play towards Underground if you get either a Vi or EZREAL early. If you only get a Kayle, the chances of you hitting both the Vi and the EZREAL from your natural shops is very low. But if you start off with the EZREAL, you really only need to hit the Vi, and the Kayle is basically guaranteed. If you hit the SONA, fuck it, hard force Underground because you're guaranteed to probably hit 2 of the 3. Again, for the AD items, you want to put them on Kayle, AP items on EZREAL. And now I'm going to go through some of the sample boards you can play at level 6 or 7. So for Underground, you generally just want to play strongest board and save as much HP as possible. You generally don't want to lose streak because the more HP you save, the more vaults you will eventually. Here is a LASERCORPS variation. You're just playing 3 Underground with 3 LASERCORPS at level 6. The 3 LASERCORPS units are going to be ASHE, RENEKTON, and YASUO. This is going to be the Star Guardian variation. Your 3 other units are going to be YUUMI, Lux, and Nyla. And your 7th unit could just be Alistar to round out your synergies. This is going to be a 3 underground variation if you hit the Samira and Zed. Here, your extra units are going to just be LeBlanc and SIVIR. This gives you Hacker and SureShot. And then for your second frontline unit, you could just play a random Blitz. This also gives you Admin because you're playing LeBlanc. And if you ever happen to hit 5 underground and you're playing Mercenary the very greedy way, this is that you're going to farm vaults way faster. And then you could spike at 1 or 2 lives and then try to win out. So Mech is back in set 8. When the mech trait is active, how it works is you pick 1 unit you want to be the mech, and then your 2 other shitter mech units will fuse into it, giving it bonus stats. So in this case, you're going to have a mech Draven. You generally want to stack Draven with all your AD items if you're playing mech, but the problem with mech is reliant on you hitting Jax. Even if you have the Draven and the Wukong, if you're relying on hitting the Jax to play mech, you're basically fucked because the chances of that are not that high. And you're already losing infinite econ by holding the Draven because Draven costs 2 gold, and Draven by itself without mech is a pretty shit unit. If you do play the mech opener, you just want to round out your frontline synergies with Brawler and Defender. Riven happens to be the perfect unit that does this because she's both a Brawler and a Defender. But again, she's a 3 cost, so she's kind of hard to hit. So a standard board is usually just going to look something like this with Poppy and Blitz as your front line. So finally, it's going to be Renegade. Renegade is also a rare opener. It's just because Talon and Silas are both kind of awkward units to hold. Especially Silas. The reason why Silas is awkward to hold is because Anima Squad and Renegade are both traits that require 3 units to hit. Even if you hold the Silas on your bench, the chances of you hitting its traits are going to be quite low. So it's very rare for you to even get this opener in the first place. But let's say you do get this opener, you generally want to play around the Camille because Camille is going to be your carry. These items are actually pretty accurate for Camille. It's just BT, IE, Hodge, Titans. It's basically like the Siphon items and show you for items from set 7. And because you're playing around the Camille to round out your synergies, you want Blitz for admin. And then because you need more frontline, you just want to play a second Brawler. So finally, I'm going to talk about the AP boards. One very strong AP board you can play early game is going to be Star Guardians. So you generally only want to play around Star Guardians if you have a Kaisa or RELL early game. So Kaisa is just an individually very strong unit. She doesn't even need the 3 Star Guardian trait to pop off because she just does so much damage. She generally likes attack speed and AP items, but you need this RELL to play Star Guardians because Star Guardian has this problem where it has no frontline, and RELL is basically the only frontline unit you have access to. At level 6, one variation you could play is going to involve Lux, YUUMI, and RELL as your 3 core Star Guardian units. Galio rounds out Mascot, Lee Sin rounds out Heart, and then Riven is both a Defender and a Brawler, so this gives you a very solid frontline early game, which is what Star Guardians lack. Again, you could also play into 5 Star Guardians at level 6, although this is a little more rare. This is also a very strong board at level 6, and you want to stack either Lux or Kaisa. And if you happen to hit either the Talia or the Echo, your level 6 board might look something like this. This is a very strong level 6 board, but it's very unlikely because it's dependent on hitting 2 4-cost units. So another very strong AP early game board you can play is going to be GADGETEEN because it gives you a full item to work with every single turn. You generally want to play towards GADGETEEN early game if you have a lot of AP items early and you get either an Annie or a Zoe drop. If you get an Annie drop, you could start holding the Poppies and the Lulus. If you get a Zoe drop, just fucking hard force GADGETEEN because Zoe opens you up so many options early game with 3 GADGETEEN. So let's say you don't hit the Zoe, a sample level 5 board might look something like this. You just stack all your tank items on your Annie and all your AP items on your Lulu, and you could just build around your current synergies. So for example, Poppy is a Defender, so you want Riven, and then Blitz fills in the Brawler synergy for Riven. But let's say you do hit the Zoe, your board could look something like this instead. Zoe opens you up to LeBlanc because they're both hackers, and because you're playing LeBlanc, it synergizes very well with Blitzcrank because they're both admins. Zoe really likes Blue Buff and Morello. What I like about this is, if you're playing around Zoe, it also gives you an extra item holder for AD items as well. Because you have Hacker in, it opens you up to Zed. And Zed is an amazing item holder for attack speed and AD items. So another early game AP board you can play is going to be Spellslingers. Very similar to Star Guardians where it lacks a frontline and Annie fulfills that condition. So if you get an Annie early game, you can play towards Spellslingers. A sample level 4 board might look something like this. 3 Star Guardians, 2 Spellslingers, tank items on Annie, AP items on your Lux. Here is a sample level 5 board with 3 GADGETEEN instead. And here is another variation if you happen to both hit LeBlanc and Sona. In this case, you want to be stacking LeBlanc because she's a very strong AP carry early game. And if you're playing LeBlanc, you just want Blitzcrank for the second admin and extra frontline. And finally, another level 6 board you could play is very similar to earlier. You're just going to be playing around LeBlanc and your Zoe with your tank items on your Annie. So another early game AP board you could play revolves around YUUMI. Because YUUMI is a mascot and a Star Guardian, you generally either play around 4 mascot or 3 Star Guardian or both. So here is a variation of a YUUMI carry with 4 mascot frontline. And because you're playing mascot, you're playing Galio, and Galio combos very well with SIVIR. So SIVIR is just another +1 if you have a lot of AD items as well. The other variation to this is 3 Star Guardians instead. Again, in this case, 4 mascot already provides a lot of frontline, so having 3 backline Star Guardians is okay in this case. And here you would stack either the YUUMI or the KAISA. So the final AP board I will be talking about early game is going to be DUELIST. Surprisingly, in set 8, some of the early game AP carries are going to be YASUO and Gangplank. So here is a sample level 4 board you play with Vertical Duelist. Fiora will be your main tank, and your carry is going to be either Gangplank or Yasuo. If you want to play around the Yasuo's other traits, you want to play around 3 Laser Core because Duelist lacks a frontline. RENEKTON is quite good. And finally, if you want to play around the Gangplank instead, your board might look something like this with 3 supers. Your 2 other supers is going to be Malphite and Lee Sin. If you have this Malphite, you can consider playing a second mascot, and if you have Lee Sin, you play around a second brawler. And because you're playing around 3 supers, you could also play into a reroll comp from this position. So this about sums up my set 8 early and mid game flex guide. If you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate it if you guys subscribe to my channel, and also consider following me on Twitch. I linked it in the description below. Once the meta settles in a bit, I'll be releasing a new video on a late game flex guide on all the late game comps you could flex between in set 8. Thank you guys for watching, and I'm going to see you guys next time.